What happens when desperation meets opportunity? What happens when a franchise realizes that sometimes the answer isn't found in chasing the unknown, but in embracing the familiar? What happens when two organizations, each trapped in their own unique purgatory, find themselves staring at a solution that benefits both, even if neither wants to admit they need help? The Toronto Maple Leafs are standing at a crossroads that feels suffocatingly familiar. Another season where the promise feels hollow, where the roster construction feels incomplete, where that gnawing sensation in your gut tells you something fundamental is missing. We watched Brad Trailerving try to patch holes, make adjustments, and find solutions to problems that seem to regenerate like a hydra. But here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in the organization wants to say out loud. The Matias Maccelli experiment has failed spectacularly, and continuing to pretend otherwise is organizational malpractice. This isn't about condemning a player who possesses genuine NHL talent. This is about acknowledging that sometimes fit matters more than skill, that sometimes chemistry is more important than potential, and that sometimes you need to cut your losses before they metastasize into something worse. Matias Maccelli arrived in Toronto with reasonable expectations. A creative middle six playmaker who had shown flashes of brilliance in Arizona, a player who could thread passes through traffic and spark transition offense. On paper, it made sense. In reality, it's been a disaster. 7 consecutive healthy scratches, an illness that sidelined him further. 5 goals and 5 assists in 22 games when he has played. Those numbers tell a story, but they don't tell the whole story. The real narrative is written in the body language, in the shrinking ice time, in the visible erosion of trust between player and coaching staff. Craig Berube doesn't strike anyone as a coach who gives up on players easily. Yet here we are watching Maccelli become a spectator rather than a contributor. The problem isn't effort. The problem isn't attitude. The problem is that Maccelli's DNA fundamentally conflicts with what this Toronto Maple Leafs team is trying to become. Berube is building an identity rooted in physicality, directness, and playoff-style hockey even during the regular season. He wants players who embrace contact, who win battles, who don't shy away from the difficult areas of the ice. Maccelli, for all his skill and creativity, plays a finesse game that requires space, time, and a system that accommodates his unique talents. That system doesn't exist in Toronto right now, and it's not going to materialize magically before the playoffs. We can debate whether that's the right organizational philosophy, but the reality is undeniable. Maccelli doesn't fit, and continuing to force a square peg into a round hole helps nobody. But here's where this story transforms from tragedy into opportunity. Just because Matias Maccelli can't find his footing in Toronto doesn't mean his NHL career is over. It doesn't mean he lacks value. It simply means he needs a different environment, a fresh start, a team whose system and expectations align with his skill set. And that team might be the Nashville Predators, an organization currently stuck in the worst possible position for any franchise. Mediocrity without direction. The Predators aren't good enough to compete for championships, but they're not bad enough to commit to a full rebuild. They're trapped in purgatory, and when you're stuck in that uncomfortable middle ground, the smart play is to start thinking younger, to accumulate assets with upside, to make calculated gambles on players whose best hockey might still be ahead of them. Matias Maccelli checks every single one of those boxes for Nashville. He's still a restricted free agent, meaning the Predators will retain team control beyond this season. He's in his mid-20s, firmly within the window where players typically take developmental leaps. And most importantly, he's not that far removed from 2 seasons where his offensive production was genuinely impressive. This year's struggles in Toronto look less like permanent decline and more like a catastrophic mismatch between player and system. For a team like Nashville that desperately needs to inject skill and creativity into a lineup that often looks plodding and predictable, Maccelli represents exactly the kind of calculated risk that rebuilding organizations should embrace. He's not going to transform their identity overnight. He's not going to turn the Predators into Stanley Cup contenders. But he could become a valuable, cost-controlled defensive piece who flourishes once removed from the suffocating pressure of the Toronto market. Imagine Maccelli in an environment where one mistake doesn't immediately land you in the press box for a week. Imagine him playing for a coach who values creativity over physicality, who gives him consistent ice time and the freedom to make plays without constantly looking over his shoulder. Imagine him rediscovering the confidence that made him an intriguing prospect in the first place. That's the gamble Nashville should be willing to take, and it's a gamble that could pay enormous dividends if Maccelli finds his game again. The Predators need players with upside. They need offensive weapons who can grow with the organization. They need to start thinking about the future, rather than clinging desperately to a present that offers nothing but disappointment. Matias Maccelli could be a foundational piece of that future, a player who arrives with something to prove and the talent to back it up. So, what does Toronto get in return? What makes this trade more than just a salary dump or a mercy move for a struggling player? The answer is both simple and profound: Michael Bunting. That name should trigger an immediate emotional response from anyone who's followed this team over the past few years. Bunting isn't just a player. He's a symbol of what this franchise has been missing since his departure. He's the embodiment of grit, heart, and that indefinable quality that separates playoff performers from regular season contributors. When Michael Bunting wore the blue and white, he didn't just play hockey. He waged war. He chirped opponents. He crashed the net. He absorbed punishment and dished it out in equal measure. He made life miserable for opposing defensemen and goalies, creating space for his more skilled line mates through sheer force of will. Let's not romanticize his tenure beyond reality. Bunting took penalties, sometimes at inopportune moments. His playoff performances were inconsistent. He wasn't perfect, but he was present. He never disappeared. He never looked overwhelmed by the magnitude of playing in the most scrutinized hockey market in the world. In fact, he seemed to thrive on it, feeding off the energy and pressure that crushes lesser players. As a rookie, he slotted onto the top line alongside Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, and didn't just survive, he thrived. He was a discount version of Matthew Knies before Knies arrived, bringing that net front presence and willingness to do the dirty work that elite scorers need from their line mates. Since leaving Toronto, Bunting's production has been adequate but unspectacular. He's still useful on the power play. He's still willing to go to the net. He's still producing in spurts. But on a Nashville team that's going nowhere, his value is somewhat muted. His skill set doesn't align with a rebuilding timeline. He's 30 years old, a pending unrestricted free agent who doesn't fit the profile of what the Predators should be prioritizing. But for Toronto, for a team desperately searching for that elusive edge, for that emotional bite that separates contenders from pretenders, Michael Bunting's value is amplified exponentially. He's a known quantity who requires zero adjustment period. He understands the market. He knows the expectations. He's already proven he can handle the pressure and produce in this environment. The beauty of bringing Bunting back isn't just about what he does on the ice, though that's significant. It's about what he represents to the locker room and the fan base. It's about reclaiming a piece of the team's identity that was lost when he departed. It's about sending a message that this organization values toughness, compete level, and playoff pedigree as much as skill and potential. The Maple Leafs have been criticized for years for being too soft, too skilled, too unwilling to embrace the physical elements that define playoff hockey. Adding Michael Bunting directly addresses that criticism. It shows the players, the fans, and the rest of the league that Toronto is serious about building a complete team capable of winning in May and June, not just accumulating points in October through March. Now, let's address the mechanics of actually completing this trade, because straight-up swaps rarely work in the modern NHL, where contract details and salary cap management dominate every transaction. A one-for-one Maccelli for Bunting exchange doesn't quite balance out when you examine the details. Maccelli is younger, cheaper, and still under team control as a restricted free agent. Those factors give him value beyond his current on-ice production. Bunting, conversely, is 30 years old, carries a higher cap hit, and becomes an unrestricted free agent at season's end. Those factors diminish his trade value, regardless of his on-ice contributions. So if Brad Treliving is doing his job properly, he's asking for more than just Michael Bunting in return. The framework that makes sense for both organizations would be Bunting plus a mid-round pick coming back to Toronto. That compensates for the age differential in contract status, while giving Toronto an additional asset. To make the salary cap mathematics work more cleanly, Nashville could retain a portion of Bunting's salary, perhaps 25%, That retention would give Toronto additional cap flexibility, while costing Nashville relatively little, since they're not competing for anything meaningful this season anyway. This isn't a blockbuster trade that dominates headlines for weeks. This isn't a franchise-altering move that reshapes entire rosters. This is a pragmatic, sensible exchange that accounts for age, contract status, team control, and immediate versus long-term value. In the short term, Toronto wins this trade decisively and unequivocally. Michael Bunting helps immediately. He stabilizes the middle six. He adds crucial playoff credibility. He requires absolutely no learning curve or adjustment period. You know exactly what you're getting, warts and all. He's a player who can step into the lineup tonight and contribute from his first shift, injecting that much-needed fire and net front presence that's been missing. In the long term, Nashville potentially wins if Matias Maccelli rediscovers his game and develops into the offensive weapon he showed flashes of becoming in Arizona. But that's a big if, and it's a gamble that rebuilding organizations should be willing to take when the alternative is clinging to aging veterans who don't fit the timeline. The reality that nobody wants to acknowledge is that Maccelli was always a questionable fit in Toronto from the moment he arrived. There was never a clear, consistent role where his unique skill set truly made sense within the Maple Leafs' current identity and expectations. He needed a specific system, specific line mates, and specific deployment to maximize his effectiveness. None of those elements existed in Toronto, and they weren't going to materialize magically. Sometimes talented players fail not because they lack ability, but because the environment doesn't support their success. That's not a condemnation of the player or the organization. It's simply an acknowledgement that fit matters enormously in professional sports. If Matias Maccelli lands in Nashville and finds his confidence, if he rediscovers his offensive touch and develops into a consistent middle six contributor, the Predators will have acquired a valuable asset at minimal cost. That's the upside of taking calculated risks on young players with pedigree. Sometimes they pan out spectacularly. Sometimes they don't. But when you're a team in Nashville's position, stuck between competing and rebuilding, those are exactly the kinds of gambles you should be making. You accumulate young talent with upside and hope that some percentage of those acquisitions develop into core pieces. This potential trade isn't just about moving pieces on a chessboard or manipulating salary cap figures. It's about two organizations at vastly different stages of their competitive cycles finding a mutually beneficial solution to their respective problems. Toronto is desperately trying to maximize their championship window, while their core players remain in their prime. Every decision must be evaluated through that lens. Does this move make us better right now? Does this improve our chances of winning 4 playoff rounds? Michael Bunting unequivocally makes Toronto better immediately. He brings elements that are missing from the current roster. He provides depth, physicality, and playoff experience that could prove invaluable when the games matter most. Nashville, conversely, needs to start thinking about the future rather than clinging to a present that offers nothing but mediocrity. They need to accumulate young assets, take chances on players with upside, and build towards something sustainable rather than treading water indefinitely. Matias Maccelli fits that profile perfectly. He's young enough to be part of the next competitive Predators team. He's talented enough to potentially become a significant contributor, and he's available at a price that doesn't require Nashville to sacrifice anything of real value. It's the definition of a low-risk, high-reward gamble. The emotional component of this trade cannot be understated, particularly from Toronto's perspective. Michael Bunting isn't just another depth forward. He's a player who resonated deeply with the fan base during his time here. He represented the kind of blue-collar, lunch-pail mentality that Toronto fans have always appreciated. He wasn't the most skilled player on the ice, but he was often the hardest working. He didn't have the best hands, but he had the biggest heart. Those qualities matter enormously in a market like Toronto, where fans can forgive mistakes but struggle to forgive lack of effort. Bunting never gave anyone reason to question his commitment or desire. He left everything on the ice every single night. Bringing him back will be more than just a hockey transaction. It would be a symbolic gesture that resonates throughout the organization and the fan base. It would signal that management understands what this team needs, that they're willing to prioritize character and compete level alongside skill and potential. It would demonstrate that Brad Treliving learned from the mistakes of previous regimes that overvalue potential at the expense of proven production. Sometimes the best move isn't the flashiest acquisition or the biggest name. Sometimes it's bringing back a player who already proved he can succeed in your environment, who already demonstrated he can handle the pressure, who already earned the respect of teammates and fans alike. The timing of this potential trade is also crucial. We're approaching the deadline period where teams make their final pushes, where contenders load up for playoff runs and rebuilders sell off expiring contracts. The market will be flooded with available players, and prices will fluctuate based on supply and demand. But the Maccelli for Bunting framework exists outside that typical deadline frenzy because it's not a rental situation. Both players have turned beyond this season, which changes the calculus entirely. Toronto isn't just acquiring a 3-month rental. They're bringing back a player who could contribute for the remainder of this season and potentially beyond if both sides have interest in an extension. That long-term flexibility makes this trade even more appealing from Toronto's perspective. If Bunting performs well and fits seamlessly back into the lineup, the Leafs could explore an extension that keeps him in the organization for multiple years. If the fit isn't quite right, or if circumstances change, he becomes a valuable trade chip next season or walks in free agency without costing Toronto anything beyond the initial acquisition. That optionality is valuable in a league where flexibility often determines success. You're not locked into a long-term commitment, but you're also not limited to a short-term rental. It's the perfect middle ground that allows the organization to evaluate and adjust based on results. From Nashville's perspective, acquiring Matias Maccelli represents a philosophical shift toward youth and development. It signals to the fan base and the rest of the league that the Predators are thinking about the future rather than desperately clinging to a competitive window that is clearly closed. That kind of organizational honesty is rare in professional sports, where executives often prioritize short-term survival over long-term sustainability. But the Predators have reached a point where honesty is necessary. They're not competing for championships with this roster. They're not one or two pieces away from contention. They need to rebuild, and rebuilding requires accumulating young talent with upside. Maccelli fits that description perfectly. The psychological impact on both players cannot be ignored either. Matias Maccelli needs a fresh start desperately. He needs to escape the suffocating pressure of Toronto, where every mistake is magnified and every game feels like a referendum on his entire career. He needs an environment where he can play freely, make mistakes without fear of immediate benching, and rediscover the joy that made him fall in love with hockey in the first place. Nashville could provide that environment. The pressure is lower. The expectations are more reasonable. The opportunity for consistent ice time and a defined role is greater. Sometimes talented players just need a change of scenery to unlock their potential, and this trade could provide exactly that catalyst for Maccelli. Michael Bunting, conversely, gets to come home. He gets to return to a city and an organization where he already proved himself, where he already earned respect, where he already demonstrated he can thrive under intense scrutiny. There's comfort in familiarity, especially for a player who spent the past couple seasons bouncing between organizations without finding a stable home. Toronto represents stability, opportunity, and a chance to contribute to something meaningful. Bunting would arrive with something to prove, with motivation to show that his departure was a mistake, with a hunger to help deliver the championship that eluded him during his first stint. That kind of motivation is invaluable and cannot be manufactured or taught. The tactical deployment of Michael Bunting in Toronto's lineup offers multiple possibilities that enhance his value. He could slot onto the second line alongside John Tavares and William Nylander, providing the net front presence and physicality that unit desperately needs. He could anchor the third line with Dakota Joshua, creating a shutdown unit that can match up against opponents' top lines while still providing secondary scoring. He could even rotate through different positions based on matchups and game situations, giving Craig Berube the flexibility to adjust his lineup without sacrificing effectiveness. That versatility is enormously valuable, especially in the playoffs when coaching staffs need to make constant adjustments based on opponent strategies. The power play deployment is another area where Bunting's return makes immediate sense. Toronto's power play has been inconsistent this season, often lacking that net front presence that creates chaos and generates second chance opportunities. Bunting excels in that role. He's willing to plant himself in front of the goalie, absorb cross-checks and slashes, and create screens that allow shooters like Matthews and Nylander to find openings. His presence on the power play would provide another dimension that opposing penalty kills must account for, potentially opening up additional opportunities for the skilled players around him. It's not flashy, but it's effective, and effectiveness matters more than style when championships are on the line. The penalty kill is yet another area where Bunting's versatility provides value. While he's not primarily known as a defensive specialist, he's capable of contributing in short-handed situations through his work ethic and hockey sense. Having depth forwards who can play in all situations reduces the burden on your top players and provides coaching staffs with more options when managing ice time and matchups. That depth becomes crucial during playoff runs when games extend into overtime and fatigue becomes a factor. You need players who can contribute in multiple roles, and Bunting fits that description perfectly. So here we stand, Leafs Nation, staring at a potential trade that addresses multiple needs simultaneously while correcting a past mistake and providing both organizations with clear paths forward. Matias Maccelli gets the fresh start he desperately needs in an environment that could unlock his potential. Nashville gets a young, skilled player with upside who fits their rebuilding timeline. Toronto gets back a proven contributor who brings exactly the elements missing from the current roster. And Michael Bunting gets to come home, to return to a city where he already proved himself, to contribute to a championship pursuit that could define his legacy. This isn't about one team winning the trade decisively. This is about two organizations making intelligent decisions that benefit their specific circumstances and timelines. This is about recognizing when fit matters more than talent, when proven production trumps potential, when sometimes the best move forward requires looking backward. Brad Treliving has shown throughout his tenure that he's willing to make difficult decisions, to admit when something isn't working, and to take action rather than hoping problems resolve themselves. Acquiring Michael Bunting while moving on from Matias Maccelli would be another example of that decisive leadership. The window for this Maple Leafs core is narrowing with each passing season. Auston Matthews is in his prime, but won't stay there forever. John Tavares continues to defy age, but Father Time remains undefeated. William Nylander is producing at an elite level, but will eventually decline. This is a time for bold action, for strategic moves that maximize championship potential, for decisions that prioritize winning now over hypothetical future success. Michael Bunting helps Toronto win now. He provides immediate value in multiple roles. He brings intangibles that don't show up in statistics, but matter enormously in playoff hockey. And he does all of this at a reasonable acquisition cost that doesn't mortgage the future or sacrifice core assets. If you're passionate about this team, if you live and breathe every shift, every goal, every heartbreaking playoff exit, then you need to be part of this conversation. Join our community of diehard supporters who refuse to accept mediocrity, who demand excellence, who believe that this Toronto Maple Leafs team can finally break through and deliver the championship that generations have dreamed about. Your voice matters. Your perspective adds value. Together, we'll continue analyzing every move, debating every decision, and supporting this team through every triumph and setback. One final thought to leave you with as you process this potential blockbuster. If Brad Treliving called you right now and asked whether you should pull the trigger on swapping Maccelli for Bunting, what would your answer be? Would you embrace the return of a beloved player who brings exactly what this team needs? Or would you hold on to hope that Maccelli can still figure out in Toronto? The answer might reveal more about your philosophy on team building than you realize.